Okay, I think we're going.
Hello everyone, this is Reverend Dr. Roger Paul, and tonight we're going to study paper 151, Tarrying and Teaching by the Seaside, and that starts on page 1688 in the old Urantia Book, the original. And we'll say a little prayer and we'll get started. Our cat needs some attention here. You don't have to listen. Father, thank you for bringing us together today that we might study this wonderful revelation, that we might learn a little bit from it, and that we might remember some of it and share it with others. We're grateful to get back going on the life of Christ, and that we might learn from His words. We thank you and we give you the praise in your Son Michael's name, Jesus of Nazareth. Amen. Okay. Tarrying and Teaching by the Seaside. I think I'm going to go in the order of the picture so I can keep track of everything. Okay. So I'll start. Paper 151, Tarrying and Teaching by the Seaside. By March 10 of all of the preaching and teaching groups had foregathered at Bethsaida. Thursday night and Friday night, many of them went out to fish. On the Sabbath day, they attended the synagogue to hear an aged Jew of Damascus discourse on the glory of the father Abraham. Jesus spent most of this Sabbath day alone in the hills. That Saturday night, the Master talked for more than an hour to the assembled groups on the mission of adversity and the spiritual value of disappointment. This was a memorable occasion, and his hearers never forgot the lesson that he imparted. What a wonderful thing. Remember, the Sabbath was on Saturday, right? So Saturday night was when he talked. And also, he talked about, it says in this first slide, the mission of adversity and spiritual value of disappointment. And I was just talking about this today. I was telling a friend of mine that the blessings in this world are many times the hard things we go through, not the good things that we go through. Because it's through the hard things and the bad things we think we go through in life that we learn the greatest spiritual lessons. So really the blessing is the bad things, not the good things. So that's kind of a hard pill to take, isn't it? It seems to be true. All right, let's go on. Diane, would you take the next one? Oh, I can. Oh, the first slide we got up here is the third preaching tour, and this is where Jesus was during this period of time. And we'll change it. You can look at those slides at your leisure. Okay?
Jesus had not fully recovered from the sorrow of his recent rejection at Nazareth. The apostles were aware of a peculiar sadness mingled with his usual cheerful demeanor. James and John were with him much of the time, Peter being more than occupied with the many responsibilities having to do with the welfare and direction of the new corps of evangelists. This time of waiting before starting for Passover at Jerusalem, the women spent in visiting from house to house, teaching the gospel and ministering to the sick in Capernaum and the surrounding cities and villages.
Okay, so this time the women were active in doing their mission also, right? And it's hard to remember, but paper 150 is when Jesus was rejected at his own home in Nazareth, in the synagogue at his own home. And that's where we left off when we were doing our Sunday meetings, which is quite a long time ago. Okay. Millie, would you take the next one, please?
Yes. About this time, Jesus first began to employ the parable method of teaching multitudes that so frequently gathered around him. Since Jesus had talked with the apostles and others long into the night on this Sunday morning, very few of the group were up for breakfast. So he went out at the seaside and sat alone in the boat, the old fishing boat of Andrew and Peter, which was always kept at his disposal. And he meditated on the next move to be made to the work of extending the kingdom. that Nazareth was not to be alone for long. Very soon, people from Capernaum. Very soon, the people from Capernaum and nearby villages began to arrive, and by 10 o'clock that morning, almost 1,000 were assembled on shore near Jesus' boat, and were clamoring for attention. Peter was now up and making his way to the boat, said to Jesus, "Master, shall I talk to them?" But Jesus answered, "No, Peter, I will tell the story." And then Jesus began the recital of the parable of the sower, one of the first of a long series of such parables which he taught the throngs that followed after him. The boat had an elevated seat on which he sat, for it was the custom to sit when teaching, while he talked to the crowd assembled along the shore. After Peter had spoken a few words, Jesus said,
Okay, let's stop there for just a second. The parables. I want to make a comment about the parables themselves. For years, when I used to go to church constantly, especially in the Baptist church, we had the ministers always interpreting the parables for us, right? Telling us what they were supposed to mean, right? And after reading and studying this paper, you come to realize that's not what the parables were about. The parables were for the enlightened believers that were following them around, that were learning, right? And those who had just come into the fold, right? And as they become more enlightened, the parables were meant to inspire these people, and they were supposed to make their own interpretation of the parable according to their own experience in life. Okay? So there is no set definition of what the parable is supposed to mean. Okay? And the apostles made this same error in understanding about the parables, because they kept asking Jesus to explain to them what the parable meant. The parable itself was supposed to be for inspiration for each individual individually. Okay? So when you listen to the parables and you read the parables and study them, the impressions you get from the parables are your own interpretation of it. And that's the way it is supposed to be. And that's one of the reasons he started teaching in parables. Because those who were non-believers, it just confused them, right? Because those who were against them, it confused them because they could not find fault in what Jesus was teaching, because he wasn't saying definite things that they should believe. You see that? He was giving them parables, allowing them to spiritually grow and be enlightened from the parable at their own pace with their own interpretation. Okay? So if you look at the parables in that way, when you read them, you will come up with your own interpretation of the parables, and that's what Jesus intended you to do. All right?
So it's the whole book is like that. Huh?
The whole book is like that. If you think about it, the book is a big parable, isn't it? It tells us in many ways. In other ways, it's just the truth, right? But it tells us all about the universe, religion, everything you can think of, and it expects us to develop our own enlightened spiritual life from what we receive from it, right? And that's why I keep saying, this is my interpretation of the book when I'm teaching, but your interpretation may be totally different, and that is fine, right? Because we're all gaining enlightenment from it, right? We're all discovering truth as we go. Okay? All right, let's move to... Yes?
You mentioned that one reason he spoke in parables. I think the other reason was to avoid the Jewish priesthood.
That's exactly right, Rodney. We're going to find that out in this paper tonight. He didn't want them to give them any cause to be offended by him, right? And any cause to arrest them before he was ready for his mission to be finished, right? So, yeah, it's very intelligent, and it kind of threw the apostles off at first, right? So let's go on with this, the first parable. Rodney, would you take the first?
Yeah, Sower went forth to sow. And it came to pass, as he sowed, that some seed fell by the wayside, and he trodden underfoot, and devoured by the birds of heaven. Other seed fell upon the rocky places, where there was no earth, and immediately it sprang up, because there was no depth to the soil. But as soon as the sun shone, it withered, because it had no root, whereby to secure moisture. Other seed fell among the thorns,
Hello?
and sprung up. It was choked, so that it yielded no grain. Still other seed fell upon good ground, and growing yielded much, some 30-fold, some 60-fold, and some 100-fold. And when he had finished speaking this parable, he said to the multitude, He who has an ears to hear, let him hear.
And what does that tell us? He who has ears to hear, let him hear. In other words, if you have spiritual understanding of what I'm saying, absorb what I'm saying. But if you don't have those spiritual ears to hear it, then there's nothing we can do for you, right? So if you have the ears to hear, let him hear, right? What a beautiful concept if you think about it, right? We're not going to go into great detail explaining these tonight. They're going to discuss these in these slides, but I'm not going to expound on them because that defeats the purpose of the parable itself, right? All right. Let's, Stephen, would you take the next one?
The apostles and those who were with him, when they heard Jesus teaching, were greatly perplexed, and after much talking among themselves. That evening, in his empty garden, Matthew said to Jesus, Master, what is the meaning of the large sayings which you present to the multitude? Why do you speak in parables to those who seek the truth? And Jesus answered.
And this is his response. Yeah, this one's hard to read because it's in red. These are the words of Jesus in red. In patience I have instructed you all this time. To you it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. But to the undiscerning multitudes and those who seek our destruction, from now on the mysteries of the kingdom shall be presented in parables. And this we will do, that those who really desire to enter the kingdom may discern the meaning of the teaching and thus find salvation, while those who listen only to ensnare us be more confounded in what they will see without seeing, and will hear without hearing. My children, do not perceive the law of the Spirit, which decrees that to him who to him who has shall be given, so that he shall have an abundance. But from him who has not shall be taken away even that which he has. Therefore will I henceforth speak to the people much in parables, to the end that our friends and those who desire to know the truth may find that which they seek, while our enemies and those who love not the truth may hear without understanding. Many of these people follow not in the way of the truth. The prophet did indeed describe all such undiscerning souls when he said, For this people's heart has waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should discern the truth and understand it in their hearts. So it's Jesus' opinion is what? That if we listen and watch and try to understand the parables the message of the parable will become evident to us, right? Individually. Okay. So it kills two birds with one stone. It speaks to the people, and it does not speak to those who are the enemies. Yeah.
Kill two birds with one stone.
Yeah.
Don't wanna kill any birds.
Yeah.
The apostles did not fully comprehend the significance of the Master's words. As Andrew and Thomas talked further with Jesus, Peter and the other apostles withdrew to another portion of the garden where they engaged in earnest and prolonged discussion.
Millie, would you take the next one?
Yes. Interpretation of the parable. As Peter and the group about him came to the conclusion that the parable of the sower was an allegory, that each picture had some hidden meaning, and so they decided to go to Jesus and ask for an explanation. Accordingly, Peter approached the Master saying, "We are not able to penetrate the meaning of this parable, and we desire that you explain it to us, since you say it is given us to know the mysteries of the kingdom." And when Jesus heard this, he said, "Peter, my son, I desire to withhold nothing from you. But first, suppose you tell me what you have been talking about. What is your interpretation of the parable?"
So what does he do right off? He lets Peter explain his interpretation of the parable, right? Rodney.
As contentious as those things are, I'm sure they were arguing over it.
Of course.
After a moment of silence, Peter said, "Master, we have talked much concerning the parable, and this is the interpretation I have decided upon. The sower is the gospel preacher. The seed is the word of God. The seed which fell by the wayside represents those who do not understand the gospel teaching. The birds which snatched away the seed that fell upon the hardened ground represent Satan, or the evil one, who steals away that which has been sown in the hearts of these ignorant ones. The seed which fell upon the rocky places, and which sprang up so suddenly, represents those superficial and unthinking persons who, when they hear the glad tidings, receive the message with joy. But because the truth has no real root in their deeper understanding, their devotion is short-lived in the face of tribulation and persecution. When trouble comes, these believers stumble. They fall away when tempted. The seed which fell among thorns represents those who hear the word willingly, but who allow the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches to choke the word of truth so that it becomes unfruitful. Now the seed which fell in good ground and sprang up to bear, some 30, some 60, and some 100-fold, represents those who, when they have heard the truth, receive it with varying degrees of appreciation, owing to their differing intellectual endowments, and hence manifest these varying degrees of religious experience.
Pretty good interpretation, isn't it? So this was Peter's interpretation of the parable, right? So we go on. Stephen, would you take the next one?
Okay. Jesus, after listening to Peter's interpretation of the parable, asked the other apostles if they did not also have suggestions doctrine. To this invitation, only Nathanael responded.
Nathaniel.
Nathanael responded. Said he, "Master, While I recognize many good things about Simon Peter's interpretation of the parable, I do not fully agree with him. My idea of this parable would be the seed represents the gospel of the kingdom, while the sower stands for the messenger of the kingdom. The seed which fell by the wayside on hard ground represents those who have heard but little of the gospel, along with those who are indifferent to the message and who have hardened their hearts. The birds of the sky that snatched away the seed which fell by the wayside represents one, habits of life, the temptation of evil, and the desire of the flesh. The seed which fell among the rocks stands for those emotional souls who are quick to receive new teaching and equally quick to give up the truth when confronted with the difficulties and realities of living up to this truth. They lack spiritual perception. The seed which fell among the thorns represents those who are attracted to the truths of the gospel. They are minded to follow its teachings, but they are prevented by the pride of life, jealousy, envy, and the anxieties of human existence. The seed which fell on good soil sprang up to bear, some 30, some 60, and some 100-fold, represents the natural and varying degrees of ability to comprehend truth and respond to its spiritual teaching by men and women who possess diverse endowments of spiritual illumination.
Another good interpretation, right? That's how Nathaniel perceived of the parable, right? All right. When Nathanael had finished speaking, the apostles and their associates fell to serious discussion and engaged in earnest debate, some contending for the correctness of Peter's interpretation, while almost an equal number sought to defend Nathanael's explanation of the parable. Meanwhile, Peter and Nathanael had withdrawn to the house, where they were involved in a vigorous and determined effort, the one to convince to change the mind of the other. Doesn't this sound like many of our discussions you see on the Urantia groups on Facebook? This is what's going on. Their interpretation of the Urantia book has become an issue they feel they have to prove to others, right, in the same group. Is that our job to do that? I don't think so, right?
Where is that, Doctor?
I said that's how many of the Facebook groups we have in the Urantia groups, they start bickering on Facebook with each other about the interpretation of the Urantia book. Is this not true? Happens all the time.
Even as you interpret it for us, when we disagree, we speak up and you don't correct us. You just listen to it.
That's exactly
And our interpretation.
of your interpretation, and that's the way it should be, Millie, because who's to say that I'm right and you're wrong, or you're right and I'm wrong?
No.
Nobody's an authority, right? This
There's
is
no right and wrong in how to interpret this book.
That's exactly right, Millie. That's the whole point. And that's what he's talking about with these parables. There's no right and wrong way to interpret the parable. You receive from it that which you're ready to handle and the enlightenment that state you're in right now. Now, in 10 years, you might think of it totally different, right? Just like
As you grow, you'll change.
as you grow, you change. That's exactly right. So, you know, when I sent out the email and said we're going back to the life of Christ instead of redoing the last 5 papers in the 3rd section, I had covered those 5 papers starting in 2013, mostly in 2014. And I listened to the papers again, and some of the things I said aren't exactly correct, but they're good enough to stand for people that are interested in learning the book. So if I redid them, I'd probably say a few things differently, but that doesn't mean that the things I said in the first place are not right for those who listen, right?
That's where you were at the time.
That's where I was at the time. And as I grow in spirituality, my concepts change, right? And that's just the way it is. And none of us are 100% right on anything, are we?
Roger,
Yeah.
it sounds like we're gonna have to start over with the book.
I know what you mean, Rodney. I really do. Let's go on to the next one. Let's see.
The master permitted this confusion to pass the point of most intense expression. Then he clapped his hands and called them about him. When they had all gathered around him once more, he said, "Before I tell you about this parable, do any of you have aught to say?" Following a moment of silence, Thomas spoke up. "Yes, Master, I wish to say a few words. I remember that you once told us to beware of this very thing. You instructed us that when using illustrations for our preaching, we should employ true stories, not fables, and that we should select a story best suited to the illustration of the one central and vital truth which we wish to teach the people, and that having so used the story, we should not attempt to make a spiritual application of all of the minor details involved in the telling of the story. I hold that Peter and Nathaniel are both wrong in their attempts to interpret this parable. I admire their ability to do these things, but I'm equally sure that all such attempts to make a natural parable yield spiritual analogies in all its features can only result in confusion and serious misconception of the true purpose of such a parable. That I am right is fully proved by the fact that, whereas we were all of one mind an hour ago, now are we divided into two separate groups who hold different opinions concerning this parable, and hold such opinions so earnestly as to interfere, in my opinion, with our ability fully to grasp the great truth which you had in mind when you presented this parable to the multitude, and subsequently asked us to make comments upon it.
You see where they were going with this? Okay? They did the same things that we as humans do about the Urantia Book, right? What we're trying to discern is the real truth that the book is trying to teach us, right? And all the rest of it is our interpretation of such, right? Certain things are presented as plain truth, any way you look at it. And other things are left for our human intellect to discern, right? Okay?
If you look at it, it's dividing the group, then that's probably a negative. But if it's getting agreement from the group, then it's something that is beneficial.
That's exactly right, Steve. You hit it on the head. Millie, would you take the next one?
Yes. The words which Thomas spoke had a quieting effect on all of them. He caused them to recall what Jesus had taught them on former occasions. And before Jesus resumed speaking, Andrew arose, saying, "I am persuaded that Thomas is right, and I would like to have him tell us the meaning he attaches to the parable of the sower." After Jesus had beckoned Thomas to speak, he said, "My brethren, I do not wish to prolong this discussion, but if you so desire, I will say that I think this parable was spoken to teach us one great truth, and that is that our teachings of the gospel of the kingdom, no matter how faithful and efficiently we execute our divine commissions, is going to be attended by various degrees of success, and that all such differences in results are directly due to conditions inherent in the circumstances of our ministry, conditions over which we have little or no control."
Very good, right? That hits it pretty much on the head, doesn't it? Okay. All right. Rodney, would you take the next?
When Thomas had finished speaking, the majority of his fellow preachers were about ready to agree with him. Even Peter and Nathaniel were on their way over to speak with him, when Jesus arose and said, "Well done, Thomas. You have discerned the true meaning of parables. But both Peter and Nathaniel have done you all equal good, in that they have so fully shown the danger of undertaking to make an allegory out of my parables. In your own hearts, You may often profitably engage in such flights of the speculative imagination, but you make a mistake when you seek to offer such conclusions as a part of your public teaching.
So what do we need to do when we teach publicly? We need to stick with the truth, right? As we know it, right? Not just tell stories, but try to relate the truth within the story, right? Or the point we're trying to make within the story. And we can do that many ways, right? Right. Stephen, would you take the next one, please?
Okay. Now that the tension was over, Peter and Nathaniel congratulated each other on their interpretations, and with the exception of the Alphaeus twins, each of the apostles ventured to make an interpretation of the parable of the sower before they retired for the night. Even Judas Iscariot offered a very plausible interpretation. The 12 would often, among themselves, attempt to figure out the Master's parables as they would an allegory, but never again did they regard such speculation seriously. This was a very profitable session for the apostles and their associates, especially so since from this time on, Jesus more and more employed parables in connection with his public teaching.
What a great lesson for the apostles, right? And what a great lesson for us as we go out and try to teach this book, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point of, sometimes we take it too seriously instead of just, interesting.
Yes, exactly. That's right. Okay, more about parables. The apostles were parable-minded, so much so that the whole of the next evening was devoted to the further discussion of parables. Jesus introduced the evening conference by saying, "My beloved, you must always make a difference in teaching so as to suit your presentation of truth to the minds and hearts before you. When you stand before a multitude of varying intellects and temperaments, you cannot speak different words for each class of hearers, but you can tell a story to convey your teaching, and each group, even each individual, will be able to make his own interpretation of your parable in accordance with his own intellectual and spiritual endowments. You are to let your light shine, but so with wisdom and discretion. No man, when he lights a lamp, covers it up with a vessel or puts it under the bed. He puts his lamp on a stand where all can behold the light. Let me tell you that nothing is hid in the kingdom of heaven which shall not be made manifest. Neither are there any secrets which shall not ultimately be made known. Eventually all these things shall come to light. Think not only of the multitudes and how they hear the truth, take heed also to yourself how you hear. Remember that I have many times told you, to him who has shall be given more, while from him who has not shall be taken away even that which he thinks he has." Right? So as you grow and you benefit others as you teach, you will be given more. And even as you grow spiritually, you will be given more. But if you become what? Covetous, selfish, self-centered, things like that, these things even now will be taken away from. Right? So you've been given a gift of what? Truth and enlightenment. Right? So as you share that truth, your truth and enlightenment shall multiply exponentially, right? But if you fail to share that truth and enlightenment, that's which you believe even shall fade away from you and shall be taken away, right? So it's very important.
Roger,
Yeah,
a comment, not to take it away, but anyway, Jesus said, in the kingdom of heaven, everything, there's nothing hidden.
nothing. Yeah.
That everything eventually will be known.
Yes.
But there is one thing I thought about while that was being read. And it's where, I forgot who it was, that said that nobody knows, it's a mystery about how the paradise saints can resurrect themselves.
No, that's right. But that's the
We'll ever know that.
well, that's the secret though of descending, right? Not ascending. Ascending is the direction we go with the thought adjuster. But we will eventually know the secret of how we become one with the divine adjuster and how we become a finaliter, right? And that's the secret of ascending. But only those who know those secrets, Rodney, are those who go through that experience, right? And so what you're saying in essence is really even true to that. Even those are known for those who experience it, right? If you think about it that way, you know, everything will be revealed at the time that it's appropriate for you to know it, or the being that's going to know it, right?
The continued discussion of parables and further instruction as to their interpretation may be summarized and expressed in modern phraseology as follows.
Millie.
Number 1, Jesus advised against the use of either fables or allegories in teaching the truths of the gospel. He did recommend the free use of parables, especially nature parables. He emphasized the value of utilizing the analogy existing between the natural and the spiritual worlds as a means of teaching truth. He frequently alluded to the natural as the unreal and the fleeting shadow of spirit realities.
That's an interesting statement, isn't it?
That's
Frequently
right.
it alluded to the unreal fleeting shallow. So this is just a shadow of the real reality of the spirit, which we will see.
Since we know that this life isn't our life is going to start when we leave this body.
That's right.
So this isn't real.
That's, yeah.
It's hard to believe that sometimes.
It reminds me of row, row, row the boat, right? Row, row, row the boat gently down the stream, merrily, 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 merrily. Life is but a dream.
Yes.
And in essence, life is sort of like a dream. Because when we go to our real life in the mansion worlds, this is just a shadowy existence of our previous life, right? So life is sort of like a dream to us, you know, when you think about it. All right, let's go on. I think right.
2, Jesus narrated 3 or 4 parables from the Hebrew Scriptures, calling attention to the fact that this method of teaching is not really new. However, it became almost a new method of teaching as he employed it from this time onward.
Okay, so he stuck with the parables after this, didn't he? Okay. Stephen, you're next.
3. Teaching the apostles the value of parables. Jesus called attention to the following points.
Oh, sorry. The guy behind the mouse here had a ring left there for a second. Okay. The parable provides for a simultaneous appeal to vastly different levels of mind and spirit. The parable stimulates the imagination, challenges the discrimination, and provokes critical thinking. It promotes sympathy without arousing antagonism.
The parable proceeds from the things which are known to the discernment of the unknown. The parable utilizes the material and natural as a means of introducing the spiritual and the supermaterial.
So it bridges over from one type of existence to another, doesn't it? Really?
Parables favor the making of impartial moral decisions. The parable evades much prejudice and puts new truth gracefully into the mind, and does all of this with the arousal of a minimum of self-defense of personal resentment.
How many times have you been sharing with someone and suddenly they put up this wall, right? That's what they're talking about. The parable keeps that wall from coming up because they don't feel what? They don't feel like you're invading on their property, right, or their self, right? Right.
One,
Yeah.
well, in other words, what I'm getting out of this is, when we go to teach other people these truths, perhaps we should figure out a way to make a parable of it.
Many times, Rodney, that's the best way to approach it, you know.
That's what we did now.
Yeah, many times that's it. Because if you walk up to someone straight out of the box when you just start talking to them, and you say to them, you know, Christ was not really sacrificed as for your sins. What are they going to do?
Confrontation.
Immediately,
They're going to put up that wall, right? So you can't approach it that way, right? But there's many other ways to approach the same subject, which is not under our thing for tonight. But you got to be really careful about how you approach people and approach them on their level. And there are so many different levels, and people are in so many different levels, that you have to become very wise in what you say and how you say it. That's the big trick. And it takes experience. And the only way you gain that experience is what? To know the material you're teaching cold. If you don't know it cold, then when they start asking you questions, you're going to be fumbling around like you're lost in space. Right? I mean, it's just the truth.
That's why there are more teachers teaching us.
That's why there aren't more teachers teaching us. And we need teachers worse than we need anything else. There's more teachers, more people to share the gospel. All right. Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
to reject the truth within in parabolical analogy requires conscious intellectual action, which is directly in contempt of one's honest judgment and fair decision. The parable conduces to the foreseeing of thought in the sense of hearing.
All right, so you force them to think about the subject that you're talking about, right? Stephen.
The use of a parable form of teaching enables a teacher to present new and even startling truths, while at the same time he largely avoids all controversy and outward clashing with traditional and established authority.
Which is very easy to do, right? To clash with traditional authority. Very, very easy to do. The parable also possesses the advantage of stimulating the memory of the truth taught when the same familiar scenes are subsequently encountered. So when you talk about something and individuals run into these things out in the real world, it brings this back to thought, right?
In this way, Jesus sought to acquaint his followers with many other reasons underlying his practice of increasingly using parables in his public teaching.
So Jesus did it more and more because it worked so well, right? Yeah.
Toward the close of the evening's lesson, Jesus made his first comment on the parable of the sower. He said the parable referred to two things. First, it was a review of his own ministry up to that time and a forecast of what lay ahead of him for the remainder of his life on earth. And second, it was also a hint as to what the apostles and other messengers of the kingdom might expect in their ministry from generation to generation as time passed.
So this parable even speaks to us, right? The message we give is received just like he said in the parable, right? And it was the same way with him. Rodney.
Jesus also resorted to the use of parables of the best possible reputation of the studied effort of religious leaders at Jerusalem to teach that all of his work was done by the assistance of demons and the prince of devils. The appeal to nature was an contravention of such teaching, since the people of that day looked upon all natural phenomena as the product of a direct act of spiritual beings and supernatural forces. He also determined upon this method of teaching thus enabled him to proclaim vital truths to those who desired to know the better way, while at the same time affording his enemies less opportunity to find cause for offense and for accusations against him.
It's hard for them to argue with the way he taught, right? Because he didn't give them any ammunition to charge him with, right? Stephen, would you take the message?
All right. Before he dismissed the group for the night, Jesus said, "Now will I tell you the last of the parable of the sower. I will test you to know how you will receive this. The kingdom of heaven is also like a man who cast good seed upon the earth. And while he slept by night and went about his business by day, the seed sprang up and grew. And although he knew not how it came about, the plant gave the fruit. First there was the blade, then the ear, then the full grain in the ear. And then, when the grain was ripe, he put forth the sickle, and the harvest was finished. He who has an ear to hear, let him hear."
Okay, so let's make a point here. Do you think when we plant these seeds of truth to individuals out there, that we will see the fruition of these seeds we plant? Not really, not likely, right? They will grow on their own. You put the seeds out there, and the seeds will grow on their own, and some of them will grow up beautiful plants, and some of them will grow up right in the midst of the thickles, all the weeds and everything else. But that's okay, because at judgment, whose job is it to separate the wheat from the staff? That's the ancients of days. That's not our job, right? So,
Jimmy put this in it. He says the kingdom of heaven is also like a man who casts good seeds.
that's right.
Did the kingdom of heaven cast seeds down and let us become whatever we could be?
Hang on just a second, Millie. I think this is Bill. Hello? No. What was your question again, Millie? I'm sorry. I got my hearing aids on, so every time the phone rings, I can't hear anything with the phone.
The kingdom of heaven is also like a man who casts good seed. Did the kingdom of heaven put good seed here on earth, and some of them sprang up and grew? First then an ear, and then the grain ripened and put forth. Even when others do, they sprang up and grew, and although he knew not how it came about, the plant came to fruit. Then he harvests.
That's right.
Did heaven put us down here as seeds to grow while he's not watching, or while he's watching?
While he's watching, and experienced it with us also. But if you think, Millie, part of the seeding process is what? The book, right? Because our nourishment to grow comes from our spiritual life, right? So the book, we are part of the seeds that's cast out. But the book is also part of the seeds that's cast out to help us grow into spiritual beings, right? And they cast it out to everyone. It's
Things that fell on good soil have received the book.
that's right.
Those that fell in the thorns are somewhere else.
That's
They're, they might be going to church, but they just are too involved in whatever it is they're involved in.
That's
So
it.
it's in the book.
That's correct, Millie. But remember, some of those seeds, when they pass and they're harvested, they will grow in the mansion worlds, right? They may not have the wherewithal to grow in this life, but when they get to the mansion worlds and they have the benefit of Urantia Moda, at that time they'll flourish and bloom, right?
Yes.
And that's part of the reasons the Ancients of Days is the judgment division, right? Because we are not smart enough, and we couldn't be smart enough to make those sort of decisions. So we judge not no one, right? We don't have the capability to judge. So that person next to you, you think may be terribly, awful bad, may be the one sitting next to you in the classes on the mansion worlds. You know? We just don't. That's right.
There are lots of beings on the earth today that have never been introduced to our religions of any kind.
That's right.
And they're the ones who fell on the roadside.
Yeah, that's right.
They didn't get a chance to go.
That's right. Well, and there's many that just reject it. You know, I mean, those are maybe those that fall on the rock. You know, they reject everything. Okay, let's go on.
Many times did the apostles turn this saying over in their minds, but the Master never made further mention of his addition to the parable of the sower.
That's all they said about it. Okay.
You could talk it together.
Yeah, you could. Very easily, right? All right. Millie, would you take the next one, please? You're muted, Millie.
Yes. The
Okay.
next day, Jesus again taught the people from the boat, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while he sowed, his enemy came and sowed weed among the wheat, and hastened away. And so when young days sprang up, and later were about to bring forth fruit, there appeared also the weeds. Then the servants of the household came and said to him, 'Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? Whence then came these weeds?' And he replied to his servants, 'An enemy has done this.' The servants then asked the master, 'Would you have us go out and pluck up these weeds?' But he answered them and said, 'No, lest while you are gathering them up, you uproot the wheat also. Rather, let them both grow together until the time of the harvest, when I will say to the reapers, gather up first the weeds, and bind them in bundles to burn, and then gather up the wheat to be stored in my barn.'"
Okay, this is the number one parable that people came up with the concept of hell from, right? Because he said, bundle them up to burn, right? And that's misinterpreted as saying that they're going to burn in hell, right? And, which is not true. But I did want to mention this. So you can take this however you want, but the seeds, if we take the seeds as ourselves growing up spiritually, then those growing up with us, some of them are weeds, right? But we don't know which one are the wheat and which one are the weeds, do we? So we have to accept everyone as if they were the wheat, right? And that's just the interpretation, which we, my interpretation. Okay. Rodney.
After the people had asked a few questions, Jesus spoke another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed, which a man sowed in his field. Now a mustard seed is the least of seeds, but when it is full grown, it becomes the greatest of all herbs, and is like a tree, so that the birds of heaven are able to come and rest in the branches thereof.
All right. No comment, right? Self-explanatory. Stephen.
Okay. The kingdom of heaven is also like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal. And in this way it came about that all the meal was leavened.
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 Yeah. Yeah. So basically, it's like putting what? Yeast in bread, right? So,
All right.
so the kingdom of heaven's like putting yeast in a loaf, okay? And when it came to full measure, when she got it all done, all the bread was leavened, right? So who is the leaven in this case? We are, right? And if we put our leaven out there, it will flourish and influence more than we're capable of discerning, right? Let's see. The kingdom of heaven is also like a treasure hidden in the field, which a man discovered. In his joy, he went out forth to sell all he had, that he might have the money to buy this field. Right? And the next one goes with us. Here.
The kingdom of heaven is also like a merchant seeking goodly pearls, and having found one pearl of great price, he went out and sold everything he possessed, that he might be able to buy the extraordinary pearl, which is the Urantia Book in my estimation. I mean, I buy it for all my friends and family.
Yeah, it's an
That is-
extraordinary thing to have, isn't it? Right? Your spiritual enlightenment is the most extraordinary thing in your life. And that's hard for people to understand. Right? We're all tied up in what's going on around us. Millie.
Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a sweep net, which was cast into the sea, and it gathered up every kind of fish. Now, when the net was filled, the fishermen drew it up onto the beach, where they sat down and sorted out the fish, gathering the good into the vessels, while the bad they threw away.
This is something everyone understood during that period of time, right? Gathering fish, because it was their main source of food. Right? Rodney.
Many other parables spoke Jesus to the multitude. In fact, when his time forward, he seldom taught the masses of lively students. After speaking to a public audience in parables, he would, in the evening classes, more fully and explicitly expound his teachings to the apostle and the evangelist.
He wanted to make sure they understood what he was doing and what he was talking about. Right? So in the evenings, he would expound on the parables he would teach that day. Right? All right. Stephen.
Okay. 5. Visit to Paresh.
Carissa.
Carissa. Okay. The multitude continued to increase throughout the week. On Sabbath, Jesus hastened away to heal. But when Sunday morning came, crowds returned. Jesus spoke to them in the early afternoon, after the preaching of Peter. And when he had finished, he said to his apostles, I am weary of the throngs. Let us cross over to the other side, that we may rest for a day.
So after Peter would preach, which he loved to do, right? Jesus would speak to the people. And they were so wore out from all this teaching and preaching, they decided to go across the river for the day. Okay? On the way across the lake, they encountered, I should say the lake, not the river. They encountered one of those violent and sudden windstorms, which are characteristic of the Sea of Galilee, especially at this season of the year. This body of water was almost 700 feet below the level of the sea and is surrounded by high banks, especially on the west. There are steep gorges leading up from the lake into the hills, and as the heated air rises in a pocket over the lake during the day, there is a tendency after sunset for the cooling air of the gorges to rush down upon the lake. These gales come on quickly and sometimes go away just as suddenly. And this is kind of a fresco painting about this particular incident. Right? Oh, y'all didn't see that. It's this one right here. For the Greek Orthodox Church. Dang it.
It was just such an evening gale that caught the boat carrying Jesus over to the other side of the Sunday evening. 3 other boats containing some of the younger evangelists were trailing after. This tempest was severe, notwithstanding that it was confined to this region of the lake, there being no evidence of a storm on the western shore. The wind was so strong that the waves began to wash over the boat. The high wind had torn the sail away before the apostles could furl it, and they were now entirely dependent on their oars as they laboriously pulled for the shore, a little more than a mile and a half distance, which is a long way.
That's a long way when you're rowing.
Under the
Right?
circumstances, yeah.
That's right. Millie?
Meanwhile, as Jesus lay asleep in the stern of the boat, under a small overhead shelter, the master was weary, and they left Bethsaida, and it was to secure rest that he had directed them to sail him across to the other side. These ex-fishermen were strong and experienced oarsmen, but this was one of the worst gales they had ever encountered. Although the wind and the waves tossed their boat about as though it were a toy ship, Jesus slumbered on undisturbed. Peter was at the right-hand oar near the stern. When the boat began to fill with water, he dropped his oar and, rushing over to Jesus, shook him vigorously in order to awaken him. And when he was aroused, Peter said, "Master, don't you know we are in a violent storm? If you don't save us, we will all perish."
So what was the reaction? Jesus to save him, right? All right. Rodney.
You know, he must have been very tired.
He must have been.
Very tired.
As Jesus came out in the rain, he looked first at Peter and then peering into the darkness of the struggling oarsman. He turned his glance back upon Simon Peter, who, in his agitation, had not yet returned to his oar, and said, "Why are all of you so filled with fear? Where is your boat? Peace, be quiet." Jesus had hardly uttered this rebuke to Peter and the other apostles. He had hardly bidden Peter seek peace, wherewith to quiet his troubled soul, when the disturbed atmosphere, having established its equilibrium, settled down into a great calm. The angry waves almost immediately subsided. All the dark clouds, having spent themselves in a short cloud, vanished, and the stars of heaven shone overhead. All this was purely coincidental as far as we can judge. But the apostles, particularly Simon Peter, never ceased to regard the episode as a nature miracle. It was especially easy for the men of that day to believe in nature miracles, inasmuch as they firmly believed that all nature was a phenomenon directly under the control of spirit forces and supernatural beings.
And we know that's not the case, right? So this was not a nature miracle. Jesus did not calm the seas. I mean, the lake, right? This was a natural occurrence. What he was talking about, calming and being still, was Peter's soul. It's calm down, everything will be fine. And it always brings you back to the fact that what? Nothing in this planet is of concern to us. Because of why? Because we're going to the mansion works. If something happens to this body, we will go on, right? So death is of no consequence, right? You still go on. All right. Steve.
Okay. Jesus plainly explained to the 12 he had spoken to their troubled spirits and had addressed himself to their fear-tossed minds, that he had not commanded the elements to obey his word, but it was of no avail. The Master's followers always persisted in placing their own interpretation on all such coincidental occurrences. From this day on, they insisted on regarding the Master as having absolute power over the natural elements. Peter never grew weary of reciting how even the winds and the waves obeyed him.
We still like to do that today, don't we? It was late in the evening when Jesus and his associates reached the shore, and since it was a calm and beautiful night, they all rested in the boats, not going ashore until shortly after sunrise the next morning. When they were gathered together, about 40 in all, Jesus said, "Let us go up into yonder hills and tarry for a few days, while we ponder over the problems of the Father's kingdom."
6, the Carissa lunatic. Although most of the nearby eastern shore of the lake sloped up gently to the highlands beyond, at this particular spot there was a steep hillside, the shore in some places dropping sheer down into the lake. Pointing up to the side of the nearby hill, Jesus said, "Let us go up on this hillside for our breakfast, and under some of the shelters rest and talk."
Did it?
This entire hillside was covered with caverns, which had been hewn out of the rock. Many of these cities were ancient sepulchres. About halfway up the hillside, on a small, relatively level spot that was the cemetery of the little village of Carissa, Jesus. They went up the hillside to a relatively level spot that was the cemetery of the little village of Carissa. As Jesus and his associates passed near the burial grounds, a lunatic who into these hillside caverns rushed up to them. This demented man, as well known about these parts, having one time been bound with fetters and chains and confined in one of the grottos, long since having broken his shackles, and now roamed at will among the tombs and abandoned sepulchres.
You know what a sepulchre is? Does everybody know what that is? Yes?
That's not the place where they put their dead.
That's right, that's right. It's a little honed out place where they put the bones or the remains of their dead, right? Okay.
Who took care of this demented man who was bound in chains and confined to one of the grottos?
Yeah,
They just leave him there?
they left him there, that's right. I guess they expected him to starve or something, I don't know.
How does the Indians do it? It's time for them to pass.
Yeah.
They think it's time.
Yeah. Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
This man, his name was Amos, reflected with a periodic form of insanity. There were considerable spells when he would find some clothing and comport himself very well among his fellows. During one of his lucid intervals, he had gone over to Bethsaida so that he heard the preaching of Jesus in the household. And at that time, had become a half-hearted believer in the gospel of the kingdom. But soon in the stormy phase of his trouble appeared, and he fled to the tombs, where he moaned, cried out aloud, and so conducted himself as to all who chanced to meet.
So they all thought he was a little crazy, right, because of his actions. All right. Didn't switch. Okay.
All right. When Amos recognized Jesus, he fell down at his feet and exclaimed, "I know you, Jesus, but I am possessed of many devils, and I beseech you that you will not torment me." This man truly believed that his periodic mental affliction was due to the fact that, at such times, evil or unclean spirits entered into him and dominated his mind and body. His troubles were mostly emotional. His brain was not grossly deceived.
Okay, so most of it was because of his emotional instability, right? Okay. Jesus, looking down upon the man, crouching like an animal at his feet, reached down and taking him by the hand, stood him up and said to him, Amos, you are not possessed of a devil. You have already heard the good news that you are a son of God. I command you to come out of this spell. And when Amos heard Jesus speak these words, there occurred such a transformation in his intellect that he was immediately restored to his right mind and normal control of his emotions. By this time, a considerable crowd had assembled from the nearby village, and these people, augmented by the swineherders from the highlands above them, were astonished to see the lunatic sitting with Jesus and his followers in possession of his right mind and freely conversing with them. They were all shocked at this, right?
As the swineherders rushed into the village to spread the news of the taming of the lunatic, the dogs charged upon a small and untended herd of about 30 swine and drove most of them over a precipice into the sea. And it was this incidental occurrence, in connection with the presence of Jesus and the supposed miraculous curing of the lunatic, that gave origin to the legend that Jesus had cured Amos by casting a legion of devils out of him, and that these devils had entered into the herd of swine, causing them forthwith to rush headlong to their destruction in the sea below. Before the day was over, this episode was published abroad by the swine tenders, and the whole village believed it. Amos most certainly believed the story. He saw the swine tumbling over the brow of the hill shortly after his troubled mind had quieted down, and he always believed that they carried with them the very evil spirits which had so long tormented and afflicted him. And this had a good deal to do with the permanency of his cure. It is equally true that all of Jesus' apostles, save Thomas, believed that the episode of the swine was directly connected with the cure of Amos.
So the story started up and then everybody started believing it, right? All right. Billy, would you take the next one, please?
Jesus did not obtain the rest that he was looking for. Most of that day he was thronged by those who came in response to the word that Amos had been cured, and who were attracted to the story that the demons had gone out of the lunatic into the herd of swine. And so, after only one night of rest, early Tuesday morning, Jesus and his friends were awakened by a delegation of these swine-raising Gentiles who had come to urge that he depart from their midst. Said their spokesman to Peter and Andrew, "Fishermen of Galilee, depart from us and take your prophet with you. We know he is a holy man, but the gods of our country do not know him. And we stand in danger of losing many swine. The fear of you has descended upon us, so that we pray you go hence." And when Jesus heard them, he said to Andrew, "Let us return to our boat."
So they just gave in and left, right? Rodney.
As they were about to depart, Amos besought Jesus to permit him to go back with them. But the master would not consent. Said Jesus to Amos, "Forget not that you are the Son of God. Return to your own people and show them what great things God has done for you." And Amos went about publishing that Jesus had cast the legion of devils out of his troubled soul, and that these evil spirits had entered into a herd of swine, driving them to destruction. And he did not stop until he had gone into all the cities of the Decapolis, declaring what great things Jesus had done for them.
Okay. Next time we'll do the events leading up to the Capernaum crisis. Let's have a little prayer real quick for tonight. Lily, would you like to pray for us tonight, too?
Yes, I can do that. Heavenly Father, we are so grateful to have this blue book, as we call it, this revelation. Help us to understand it. We thank you for trying to teach us what you really, really mean. Help us to understand the things that we read in this book. Help us to understand Jesus' place in our lives. Help us to understand how Jesus so gently and carefully and lovingly talked to people as they could understand. As we encounter friends and family, help us to also gently help them to understand what we understand. We thank you for this book. We thank you for Roger. We thank you for this group. In the name of Jesus of Nazareth. Amen.
Amen. Thank you at home for joining us. Please come see us. Oh. Who's going, sir?
It's amazing how he so loved people that he could be so kind.